now to our final speaker, who is Tamara Flanagan. And Tamara Flanagan is one of the board members and one of the founding members of a new organisation called New Europeans, which has really just come into existence, based in London, in order to promote the European citizenship rights of new Europeans, i.e. those people who want to move, reside, work, study in another member state. Tamara will talk to you a little bit about the work that the New Europeans do. They are part of our project, our Connecting with Citizens project, and we've really started to see some kind of impact and value in the work that we're doing together, which is trying to bring together both academic research into citizenship rights, together with the more practical aspects and real people's, real new Europeans' lives and how citizenship rights impact upon their kind of real life experience of living in a different country. So we're really pleased that Tamara was able to come to speak to us today. She's got a whole wealth of years of experience working with different European institutions and has been involved particularly recently with a campaign to promote voting rights for new Europeans in the European Parliament elections. So.
Okay, well, I am very glad to be here. I feel a bit in august company, and Judy is an extraordinarily hard act to follow wherever she's gone off. And we're very different. You know, we don't do research and we don't know things in great detail. We're a civil society organisation, and we're a very young civil society organisation. New Europeans was set up in 2013, so not even quite a year ago, with the specific purpose of raising awareness about the rights of EU citizenship. So this is the EU citizenship that was endowed by the Treaty of Maastricht. We call it the European Treaty for the European Union, but I think people only remember John Major if you say Maastricht. They don't remember this. And interestingly, they don't remember this, and they don't even know that this is how they come to be wherever they are, and that is an extraordinary phenomenon. My own son lives in Spain. You know, he's never really understood EU citizenship, except he can go and do that now, and loads of his friends also. And lots of people that we meet in the course of the work that we're doing are all very glad to be studying in the UK, to be working and living in the UK, to have their families with them in the UK, but without understanding that, and I was saying earlier to this lady sitting here, you don't know what you've got till it's gone, without understanding that this is something that's been brought about by legislation and which is going to be at risk if legislation is changed. So part of our thinking was, we're going to talk about EU citizenship so people know about it and remember about it and understand, and I would be lying if I didn't say the prospect of a horizon, on the horizon of a referendum, also prompted us to think this might be a good time to do it, rather than leave it until 2017 when it may be too late. So we had this very straightforward raising awareness of the rights of EU citizenship, encouraging active EU citizenship, because the whole thing about EU citizenship is not just about moving, working, studying, living. You also, of course, have the right, as I'm sure many of you know, to stand in local elections, to vote in local elections, to vote in European elections, and in some cases in referenda as EU citizens. And I'm sure you've heard Alex Salmon talking about, I think he said there were 180,000 EU citizens in Scotland who, if they vote in that the devolution referendum, could make a difference. So understanding that people have lots of rights in relation to the communities in which they're now living, if they didn't think that that was the case in the past. And the other of our objectives was about giving voice to new Europeans. So ensuring that people, just because they move country, don't lose their ability to be part of constructing the project which is Europe, and indeed its future. Now I really have to say, because the European Citizenship Initiative was mentioned earlier today, that the reality of the citizens' voice in the European Union, and I've been working for about 26 years for my sins in the European project, is really not what we would like it to be. And the European Citizens Initiative is absolutely an example of that. It was born in 2009. It was launched, having been born 3 years previously, but never mind, launched in 2012 to deafening silence in the European Commission. It's taken 2 full years for the Right to Water, the one initiative that had massive backing across Europe from trade unions, big powerful bodies, to get itself accepted by the European Commission. And that's not to mention the ones that have been rejected because they don't fall in, they don't they're not consistent with the criteria for being looked at. So right to water gets accepted, gets looked at, and the response from the European Commission on the right to water, which put very simply talks about access to water as a human right, which ought to be affordable and which ought to be wherever people are living. The response from the European Commission sadly says, well, if you look at what we've been saying about water for the last 10 years, we've said this, we've said that, we've said the other, about affordability, well, that's really a member state right now. And about actually people having the right to get it, well, you need to look at, and then you just think, where's this going? Quite honestly, as a civil society activist, I think the Citizens Initiative, I'm going to probably be retired before we see a real positive benefit, except I must say that they are going to launch a review, a citizens' review and consultation on the right to water. So in that respect, in about another couple of 3 years, we'll probably have some consultations about which most people will not be aware, asking about the rights to water, and then it'll probably all go away a bit like some of the beaches, you know, around our coastlines, which are still waiting to pay their fines for not being unpolluted. So Citizens Initiative, and of course the second biggest one, which is right there now, it's sitting, waiting to be responded to, is One of Us. And what do you think One of Us is about? Embryos' rights. Because the rights of embryos, of course, another large movement behind particular initiatives, a lot of people able to be mobilised through various religious organisations in that case. So the Citizens Initiative, it's a nice idea, but I'm really not holding my breath on it. And so in terms of this, us having our say in the future of Europe, as you'll see when I come to the end, that's probably the bit about which we feel least optimistic. However, there have been a few things, and I'll come to those. So here we are, all terribly well-meaning. We're going to have this project, we're going to found this association which looks at citizenship, European citizenship, in a non-partisan, apolitical, wholly civil society kind of way. And then we're going to luckily hook up with Sussex and develop a series of seminars and talk to people about their citizens' rights and the different things they can do. And then thinking about it, we know there's an election upcoming, but we're not too bothered until we find ourselves completely embroiled in the maelstrom, which is the Eurosceptic, media-generated negative press around EU migration. And I think it's honestly fair to say we hadn't necessarily anticipated the kind of tension that would be generated by this shift of focus from Euroscepticism to the complete wholesale blaming of European migrants for the condition, or yes, primarily European migrants, for the overuse of hospitals and schools and the loss of jobs and all the rest of it. So I think we've found ourselves, it's fair to say, doing a bit of quick response on some of the issues. And we focused particularly on the election to have a coalition of interests around the election. And in this way, we think the election is important, the European election, but also the local elections. Do you have local elections in Sussex?
Yes.
So these local elections, as much as European elections are important, and certainly in the case of the European elections, it's the 1 in 5 years opportunity to have a say, given that voting is, if you like, the pinnacle of a citizen's ability to express themselves apart from standing. We really thought we needed to say to European citizens, do you know about these elections, and it may be in your interest. We've never actually said it may be in your interest to vote, bearing in mind the referendum, but we have said if you don't have a say, then you will live with the consequences, if you like. So focusing on the elections has been a big part of the work we've done just recently. And in the Sunday Times in February, an article came out about the role of new Europeans, European citizens living in the UK particularly, and I'll come to those living elsewhere later, and their potential. I think they make up 1% of the potential registered electorate, although they are hugely under-registered, and Sue Collard's work from here shows that I I think there's something like less than 26% of those who could be registered. So this thing around the election was also about getting people to register so that they could then vote. So looking at the potential of new Europeans as a bloc, as a voting bloc if you like, but also as a group with specific interests and needs which weren't being captured anywhere. So our interest in looking at the new European vote, if you want to call it that, was picked up by the Sunday Times, and it was actually caricatured as a group, us, because we have to have a former Labour MP in our board, Roger Casal, encouraging new Europeans to vote against UKIP, which actually was not at all what we're in the business of doing. It would not serve any purpose and it wouldn't be helpful, particularly as we're a registered charity. But this was the kind of complexion that was put on it. So we promptly undertook a survey with YouGov to look at the intentions of the new Europeans who were members of our group. And this excited rather a lot of interest, particularly when we discovered that there was a group of Polish people who are the friends of UKIP, many of whom in this particular group are clearly intending to vote, so they are registered and they will be voting, but we may not think that they are seeing their interest in that. And of course their votes, like anyone's votes, reflected the spectrum of political parties. So we did the piece of the survey, which was quite well received. In fact, we also did some television work around what do new European voters, what are they interested in, what are they looking for. And I have to say, it hasn't really excited terribly much interest from the political parties. It's not something they've really picked up on as being of significance. And I think until and unless the registrations really pick up, that's probably going to be the case. It's not that new Europeans don't want to vote, it's really we have quite a long way to go, and we've only been in existence a year, and the research shows that nobody has much thought about this phenomenon, and I'll come on to that a bit later, so that there are many barriers to people getting involved with the elections, not least lots of people don't know there are elections. Believe it or not, I'm sure there's no one in this room who doesn't know there's an election, but out there are lots of people who don't know about elections, and maybe why wouldn't you? One of our group said, there are no posters. I mean, the first poster I saw about the European elections, and I haven't yet seen one about local elections, even though I have a local election, was on Sunday evening last week. I was at Waterloo Station, and I saw one of these posters, which are the European Parliament election campaign, and there are lots of them, and they're really actually very eye-catching and very nice. But I hadn't seen any. I hadn't even seen the famous UKIP with the kind of burning European flag in the middle of it until yesterday. So in a sense, you know, the elections are now 22 days away. You needed to register here on the 6th of May. You needed to register in France by the 31st of December. So if there's no evidence around for people to understand that that's going on, then, you know, understandably, the chances are that people won't be registered and that they won't be, unfortunately, voting. Something about belonging. Somebody spoke earlier about belonging, how important it is. And another reflection that we get back from people is that they don't feel they belong in our voting community, if you like, so why would they vote? They don't have a kind of personal connection. So we've been looking at various of these spurs to voting and trying to do some work ourselves with groups of new Europeans on things they might want to think about in relation to voting. And we've created this website which actually has here under the Vote, Vote, Vote campaign, which is what Sue was talking about, a series of 27, well no, not 27 because we haven't got Croatian, 20, not Belgians and French, about 23 European language letters. In fact, there'll be one in Greek saying, did you know there's a European election? If you have missed the deadline in Greece, you could pick up this leaflet, which is elsewhere on our website, and register in England if you care to, because you can by the 6th of May, and vote if you care to. So we've got this kind of multilingual work going on. We've got ambassadors from the 27 member states who can be individuals but also institutions. So we have churches. We were at the Finnish church on Sunday, which was really rather lovely because they had a kind of fair thing going on. Students groups. LSE has got a huge Italian students of LSE group that they've got in there. Individuals, community groups. I must say the Polish non-UK UK nationals are hugely well organised anyway. They've got about 15 major federations who do loads of work all over the place. The Italians are hugely well organised. French seem to look more towards France and think about French issues. The Spanish are a huge community, and we're not just in London. In fact, we're in London. We're working particularly with people in Birmingham, where I heard a lovely story about a guy who's standing for election in an agricultural area just outside of Birmingham, which I unfortunately can't remember the name of, and him encouraging Polish local people to get involved with the allotments in Birmingham, and one of them winning like the biggest tomato competition or something. So there was this whole kind of different set of activities around migrants in rural areas particularly, and bringing people not just in London, but also, I mean, we know that there are significant populations, again, from Sue Collard's work in Birmingham, Nottingham, Leicester, Liverpool, Newcastle, so we're particularly reaching out there, as well as, I might add, Scotland, Glasgow, Cardiff and Belfast. So we're trying to kind of cover all the bases a bit. We're drawing attention to our multilingual address to people, and we're also asking our individual ambassadors to go amongst people and talk with them about this. At the same time, we're not just doing this voting work because we're interested in elections, because we have this longer term vision about new Europeans being involved, being active here and having their say. We also are very keen to give a platform to new European voices. And believe it or not, you may not have noticed, but when we speak about people who are living in this country, with very few exceptions, you rarely see or hear any. We often talk about the people who are working as agricultural workers in Lincolnshire or working in the care system, majorly Portuguese women working in the health and care systems around the place, but we don't actually see people. So one of the things we set out to do, and I'll just show you that now because it's rather nice, is to do a little video on giving new Europeans voice. And I might say this is the first one we did, which we did in January, I think. And there's another one that's going to go up in the next couple of days, which is where, I don't know how to make it big. Does it matter? There?
Hello, I'm Karina Dianova from Bulgaria.
My name is Dan Klein.
Ah.
Luciano Corleone.
So I'm Ricky. I'm Łukasz Antili.
My name is Anna, and I was a business reporter for European Voice, a weekly newspaper based in Brussels.
I'm psychoanalyst, development.
Working for one of the 4 biggest banks in the UK, in the city. I'm working at the moment as a manager.
PhD student at the moment at the University of York, but I'm based down in London. I live down here.
And I'm an entrepreneur in the IT sector.
I play the violin.
What made me decide to move country? I was asked by work to go and work in France, and then decided to move. And I'd worked in other countries before France, and it appealed to me to settle down.
I decided to come in England because I really fancied the vivid atmosphere here. I had the chance to visit many countries through the whole Europe, and finally when I visit London, I just decided I want to move here to study and work.
What made me decide to move out there was that I had graduated in French and Spanish and didn't know really how to use my languages, so a friend of mine was living in Paris at the time, and she said that she had a good job and invited me out, so I packed my bags and got on the Eurostar.
My experiences helping me as a person, I found it has been very, very beneficial in how I've communicated across the whole of Europe.
My experiences in Madrid helped, I think, obviously I learnt the language, so 3 years, I got a good level of Spanish now. Having fluent French and being able to transcribe interviews and being an English speaker myself really, really helped, and it opened a lot of doors for me. I think more importantly, it helped to live in a different culture and to spend a period of time understanding and getting an idea of how a different culture works, really.
I think my career will benefit by being much more open to a whole variety of experiences that I've had in Europe.
I started as an employee where I have to learn not only the environment at work, but generally the British culture.
The main things that I learned from living in Spain, I think, were mostly the big similarities that there are in a way. I mean, at first it seemed very different, and there are lots of almost cosmetic differences, I think.
I think I contributed my skills to Belgium, obviously as a reporter, an English-speaking reporter. I also contributed quite a lot of tax.
My talent to play and to be able to play in the concerts with many different orchestras, also to have my private students, violin and piano.
The way I work, the way I think, the background I'm having, the culture, the belief, the personality, the taxes I'm paying as well in the UK.
I think I contributed to the culture. I've still got friends from over there. I still visit very often, maybe twice a year now. And so, yeah, I think they would be many things.
The right to move around Europe is extremely important to me, both personally because my husband is French-speaking Belgian, and I'd like to think that if we needed to move back to Belgium or anywhere else in the EU, we'd be able to.
The right to move around Europe is incredibly important to me because it allows a whole variety of experiences. It allows you to go where the work is, and it allows you to cooperate with people without that fear of needing to get a visa every time the French come to London, or I go to France, or a German friend of mine comes over to see me for work. So I think it's incredibly important.
I'm aware I can vote for European elections, yet I haven't done so yet.
So I did not know I had the right to vote in local European elections, and I haven't voted either.
So when I was in Spain, I think I voted in the European election. I can't remember. I remember going to an election centre.
I don't think that British people are fan of European Union. And the reason why is that I realized by living 9 years over here that British people love freedom, similar to Polish people. And when the European Union started getting a little bit limitations on different aspects of life, that's where they are not happy.
I think there's quite a lot of variation in the way that people in the UK view the EU, and that it's not really brought out a lot in public. There's not really so much reason for it.
I think the people see the EU as a very huge and big institution, very confused sometimes. So it's not very close to the normal people like me.
Likewise, there's resistance to the EU, and there are quite a lot of knee-jerk reactions a lot of the time. But I think there's a silent majority who are aware of the benefits, economic as well as, I think, social.
I think most people don't understand the EU and don't understand the nuances and differences between what constitutes Europe, the Parliament and the Commission, and Europeans, and how people cooperate together in Europe.
Actually, British people are not having the full knowledge of how they're doing, what the countries actually are about. Definitely should be improved. The knowledge of British people about the other countries should be improved.
I think that's maybe where the UK differs from other European nations. Perhaps we're a bit more resistant to this kind of centralised unification of Europe.
I feel quite optimistic for my future. First, because I'm lucky enough to study music, and that's what I want to do in future. And despite having so many musicians wanting to do the same job around me, I still feel there's enough space for everyone.
I think the EU can improve its image in a number of ways. I think one of the big issues is information. The information's there, by all means, on European Commission websites and so on, but it's somewhat inaccessible. It's not some place that you go to on your lunch break.
Am I optimistic or pessimistic about Europe's future? I think at the moment I'm neutral. I think Europe has to undergo a lot of change and will undergo a lot of change in the next 10 years.
I think there's a second issue, which is voter engagement and political engagement, and I think that people in the UK do feel quite far removed from Europe.
I'd like to be optimistic about Europe's future. Being a member's been very positive for me personally, and I think it's very positive for a great many people.
I think that the EU institution is very confused at the moment because it's so distant from the normal people like me. It's a very big institution, very complicated and sophisticated sometimes. And I think as institution need to be much more close to the normal people.
I feel optimistic about Europe's future because I think European Union is great as it is.
And my children speak both French and English quite fluently, and I'd like to think that they could double their opportunities to study either in a French-speaking country or to stay in the UK as they wanted to.
surprised to see quite a lot of English people in that, because I think that's one of the things we forget, that there may be 2.5 million Europeans living in the UK, but there are 2.3 million, depending on whose figures you use, British people living in other parts of Europe. And it's also interesting, I think, in the film that despite the fact these are all pro-European people, you might say, they bothered to turn up to be interviewed, although I might say the Bulgarian girl told me in confidence that she didn't usually tell people she was Bulgarian. So that also says something about the kind of feelings that people have about their welcome here. Even they were quite mixed in terms of their thinking about the future of the European Union. And I said to Sue when I came that one of the reasons I wanted to show the film is because we do usually, this term of giving voice to new Europeans, come with somebody else, and there is an opportunity for people to speak. So that's an important part of our work. The other important part of our work, and why I'm particularly glad to be here, is the way that we bring together research and reports and information that we have to develop positions on policy. And I was talking earlier about Magella Kilkey, who works in Sheffield, does a lot of work on family and migration, and she spoke at one of our meetings about how EU free movement is a much more family-friendly set of activities than most migration legislation. Reports like this one, which you may or may not have seen from the Electoral Reform Society, Mind the Gap, which is all about our kind of, and I don't mean new Europeans, but their perception of the UK's confusion, to use one of the participants' words, around Euroscepticism and migration, kind of confounding the whole thing a lot of the time. And some very, very important policy recommendations, not just about European citizenship, but about our engagement with the EU project. And I think a lot of our policy work is, yes, about saying these are things that are important in relation to EU citizenship. We contribute to the review of competence that the government's been doing to see which competences the UK really have more control over, despite the fact that there's absolutely no chance of them doing that because we'd have to dissolve the Lisbon Treaty for it to happen, but that's another matter. We draw attention, and this is increasingly, we found latterly, in the migration debate, drawing attention to the contribution of migrants. I mean, George Osborne will tell us that there's going to be continued growth, 3% year on year in the budget speech, without mentioning that that is absolutely dependent on a certain level of migration from other parts of Europe to maintain our GDP. So doing policy work around the perceptions of what Europe, the review of competences, the contribution of migrants, working with the TUC about positive messaging. You will probably notice in the autumn, or in any event after European elections, there will begin to be quite a lot of work started about what sorts of things we want to say about migration, because as a new way of existing with European migrants, we cannot really maintain the slightly antagonistic stance which has been set up a few months ago and continues to go on. So we've been doing some work on that. We've also been doing some quite active work around the anti-migrant press, and I'll just give you one example because I think I'm running a bit out of time. You will probably remember that Nigel Farage was telling us how the whole population of Romania and Bulgaria were due to come on the 1st of January to the UK, and the Daily Mail, always to be relied upon, ran a big story about how all of the aeroplane tickets, the coaches that go especially to London and other forms of transport were sold out, and tickets were changing hand on the Romanian equivalent of eBay for £2,000 or whatever. We were working with an investigative journalist called John Danzig, who's really, really excellent, and because we are in contact with groups of new Europeans, our Romanian members put him in touch with the various travel agencies and the transport agencies and all the rest of it in Romania, only to discover that this was complete and utter fabrication. You would have probably expected that. So much so, though, that he brought a Press Complaints Commission action, and the Daily Mail at the end of March, about the 22nd of March, printed a retraction on page 11 on the backside to say, well, that was actually factually inaccurate. But that kind of activity obviously makes us feel as though we can make a bit of progress on some of those issues. I mean, I might just add in terms of most recent comments about the culture of criminality amongst Romanians particularly. that we had another issue which is not yet resolved, where the Evening Standard was saying something like 40% of all pickpockets on the London Underground are non-British EU nationals. And when we saw the raw data about the reporting from the British Transport Police, what we found was that most people didn't give their nationality when they were apprehended for pickpocketing on the Underground. I think it was upwards of 86% or something didn't give the nationality. So the big, you know, as you guys would say, data set was all full of not known, not known, except for a very few. And amongst those very few, there were quite a lot of non-UK nationals, perhaps because, you know, they quickly pulled out their passport, I don't know what. But, you know, this way of creating stories is something that we also do quite a lot of work on examining and trying to combat. Then just for my last section about contributing to our voice to the European project, I think this is an area that we feel is really a work in progress, because given that we don't even as UK citizens have much of a voice, although I noticed that the report from the Electoral Reform Society calls for a committee to be set up to which citizens can contribute in advance of the Council of Ministers meeting on certain issues, as well as after the Council of Ministers has met. And also, I think Ed Miliband was backing this yesterday, so if that becomes policy from any of the major parties, I think we will be wanting to support that idea that we can have mechanisms for involving citizens in the debate, having a locus at least somewhere. We don't even have, you will have in the university, but we don't even have a European Citizens Office in London. Yes, there's the European representation in Europe House, but ourselves and one other country, I think it might be Greece actually, just don't have this European Citizens Info Point, because the government has never particularly expressed an interest in contributing with co-finance to insist that that's there. So I think we're in a pretty poor position at the moment. Locus for discussion from citizens into the legislation is one thing. The debate at an EU level, which is ongoing, and there are networks who will work across transnational, and you may have heard of the European Civic Forum, Solidar, Volunteer Opt. There are various groups of voluntary organisations, civil society organisations, particularly prominent last year in the European Year of Citizenship, who have as a job to raise the voice of the citizen alongside the institutions. But really, I think the big challenge is raising the voice of the citizen here, and that's not only our voice, but also the voices of those who move from country to country. So that's the work that we're going to be, I think, as soon as the elections are over, getting on with pretty rapidly. Just one last thing to come back to the European Citizens Initiative. That's part of Article 11 of the Lisbon Treaty, as you will know. The rest of Article 11 of the Lisbon Treaty actually talks a lot about citizens' voices in shaping legislation going forward, one of which, my most favourite, which I'm just going to finish on, is where it says that the institutions, all of the institutions, so this includes the European Central Bank, amongst others, will by appropriate means give citizens and representative associations the opportunity to make known and publicly exchange their views in all areas of union activity. Well, I think we're a long way from that. For us as UK citizens, let alone our constituency, New Europeans, you're probably going to see us around for a lot longer time to come. And that's me finished.